Good morning. My name's Eric Wishart. I'm a journalist with AFP News Agency, and it's my pleasure to be the host and moderator for this morning's panel on fact-checking and infodemic, and we have some real experts in our panel today, so I'll just run through our lineup. I think beside me on the screen you can see Chungka Yue, who's executive editor of Fact Check Lab, if you want to wave. Kristen Han, who's an independent journalist from Singapore. Aya Low, strategic partner development. That's our area for Facebook for the whole of the Asia Pacific area. And Rachel Blundy, my AFP colleague, who's in charge of fact checking based out of Hong Kong. So there's lots to talk about. And as we've seen, I think that a lot of misinformation about this pandemic can actually lead to people taking wrong decisions. And as we've seen in the United States, that people dying. So it's a serious topic. So to get things rolling, I was going to ask you, Rachel, to explain your work and maybe give a big picture of the kind of challenges we're facing, and particularly in this pandemic.
Everyone, Hi everyone, my name's Rachel. I'm from AFP News Agency, and I'm working in Hong Kong with a team of journalists working to fact check misinformation online. Obviously, we've been very, very busy during the pandemic, and there's never been a shortage of misinformation, I'm afraid. So I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what we've been doing. And I will share my slides with you now. So in case you don't know who we are, AFP News Agency is one of the oldest news agencies in the world. We have journalists all over the world in many, many countries. Our fact check team kind of grew out of our social media team in 2017, and we were fact checking misinformation during the French elections. So now we are working very hard throughout the pandemic to try and counter misinformation associated with COVID-19. Just to give you a sense, this is how widely we are spread around the world. I'm based in Hong Kong, and we have more than 12 countries and territories now in Asia Pacific alone that we are fact checking in. But globally, we're covering 76 countries as of July this year, writing in 15 different languages. And in Asia alone, we're publishing in 5 languages, including English, Thai, Indonesian, Malay, and recently Burmese. So during the pandemic, we published more than 1,600 reports across our 15 languages. This has been a huge effort on the part of the team. We're really proud of our work, but obviously there is still a lot of misinformation coming out as the pandemic persists. We expect to be working throughout this year on this topic. On the right, you can see an example of one of our fact checks. If you go to factcheck.afp.com, you can see all of our work in English. This is an example of an image that was circulated with a false claim in various regions, actually, including Indonesia, claiming that it shows coronavirus victims in Italy. In fact, it's an old photo from Italy in 2009, which shows victims of an earthquake. So in Asia Pacific alone, during the pandemic, we've published more than 360 reports about COVID-19 in 5 languages. We are part of the International Fact-Checking Network, which is working with many different news organizations to debunk COVID-19 misinformation, which obviously can be very harmful. You can follow us on Twitter at AFP Fact Check. And we always tweet our coronavirus stories with the hashtag coronavirus facts. This is part of the IFCN's efforts, and you will see many, many stories from other fact checkers around the world on that hashtag. So just to give you a sense, this is how some of our coronavirus stories break down in terms of types of stories that we've been producing. I would say at the beginning of the pandemic, we predominantly saw misinfo about cures and prevention methods, which we worried would, stop people from following basic social distancing because they thought they were somehow immune to the virus. And then as the pandemic has gone on, we've seen lots of hoaxes about lockdown, and rumors about the causes of the pandemic, and various kind of alarmist content that really, particularly in developing countries, I think can put people in a very anxious state and cause a lot of panic. As you see on the left, a lot of our misinfo is basically images or videos that have been circulated with a false context. And if you joined Owen Sweeney's fact-checking session yesterday, you'll have learned a bit more about reverse image searching and how that can help you to avoid being misled by that kind of misinfo. And this is a chart which just shows how, the amount of fact checks we've written about COVID-19 has slightly started to drop as we've seen misinfo decline in the last few months. We really saw the peak so far this year in April. And I think that was when the pandemic really spread to parts of Europe, to the US, and people were starting to share a lot more content. We saw the early phases of misinfo from Hong Kong as early as January, February time, when the coronavirus was first sort of being reported in China. And just to elaborate a bit more about this notion of false cures, I think it's possibly one of the most harmful types of misinfo that we see, because it can really, as I said, put people in a false sense of security about how safe they are, and how protected they are from this virus. As we know, there's no current cure for COVID-19. Scientists around the world are working to create a vaccine, but we don't think that it likely will have one until next year, certainly not in mass production. So on the left, you see a fact check we wrote about a hoax that was circulating in Sri Lanka, claiming that drinking tea could cure or relieve symptoms of COVID-19. And whilst this post is kind of innocuous in some ways, and obviously it wouldn't harm someone to drink a lot of tea, I think in other senses it can be harmful because it might mean that someone does not adhere to basic social distancing, or it might mean that they don't follow procedures like washing their hands. And this was a hoax that was being wrongly attributed to a Chinese doctor, who turned out to be a made-up doctor. And it was being circulated with a claim that it was a breaking news alert on CNN, which was also totally false. So that's how we broke that one down. Obviously, throughout the pandemic, we've seen various politicians also, touting false cures, and we have done a fair amount of work on debunking what some of them are saying. Most notably, obviously, Donald Trump, who came out with these very shocking comments that disinfectant might help to cure or treat COVID-19. We were quick to write a fact check on that. And while some people might say that, the most sensible people would not have followed his advice, there is evidence that some people did follow that advice and made themselves ill. And we also saw examples in places like the Philippines where, as a result of these comments, there were other concoctions being touted online, mixing things like bleach with various other substances. We saw numerous videos viewed tens of thousands of times in the Philippines, which suggested that you could cure or prevent coronavirus with that kind of concoction, which obviously could be very, very dangerous. and you can read these fact checks more on our website. This final one is from a report that in India that scientists in the US may have developed a COVID-19 cure. And the image that was being circulated was actually a photo that shows a COVID-19 test kit that was developed by a South Korean company. So again, a simple reverse image search on Google located where that image had come from and helped us to clarify that this was not a cure. When this kind of thing is circulated in a place like India, a country that suffered massively during the pandemic, it creates a lot of anxiety because people are desperate to get a cure, and if they hear about something happening overseas, they really might build up some false hope that a cure is on the horizon. So that's why we feel it's important to debunk it. And throughout the pandemic, I think it's important to emphasize that, sometimes things are shared with the best intentions. There are sort of viral text posts that go around on Facebook. I'm sure you've seen them yourselves, or your friends have shared them, your family have shared them. They might make some suggestions which are based on truth, but then other suggestions might not be rooted in any kind of science. And people are not necessarily trying to mislead anybody, but these things are not verified, and then they get shared without anybody checking, which can be potentially dangerous. And this is another example of prevention tips that we wrote about on our blog. So you can see both those stories on the website. Meanwhile, on the other side, there are people deliberately spreading misinformation, for their own ends, perhaps political reasons, or because they just want to, create panic, or maybe they find it amusing. So this is a character that we have found features in many hoaxes and many conspiracy theories. Bill Gates, I think because partly he has been someone who has really backed vaccines for many, many years now, and pumped lots of money into vaccine development. And obviously there is a huge anti-vax community out there, particularly in the US now, who are suggesting that somehow he is behind a global plot to get everyone vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine in an effort to put some sort of microchip inside us, which is clearly completely nonsense. But this kind of thing takes off when people are very worried about what's going on in the world. And on the right here, you have a fact check we wrote about a viral video called Plandemic. There have now been two editions of this particular series, which was originated in the US, and it's a video which peddles multiple falsehoods about COVID-19. There are many scientists who are quoted in it, but many of them are not credible people, not credible in terms of their research. They have said many things that are contradicted by the mainstream scientific community, and social media companies have been racing to take down these pandemic videos. They can be really harmful to viewers. So yeah, that's all I had today, just to give you a little introduction to what we do at AFP Fact Check. And I look forward to discussing with everybody more about what we're doing and how fact checking is working during the pandemic.
Thanks, Rachel. I just wanted to come back at you on one thing before we speak to Caillou, is your graph showing that your fact checks are going down. The graph seems to be going down, but I mean, surely the amount of misinformation, disinformation continues to rage. I mean, Margaret Sullivan wrote a column a couple of weeks ago in the Washington Post saying this was the week that America lost the battle against misinformation. It was the week that Donald Trump, I think, there was the press conference on the steps of the Supreme Court with these doctors, with the doctors saying she's got a cure, and they were touting hydroxychloroquine again, and then and subsequent to that, Trump has last week basically endorsed QAnon, saying they're full of great people, they love me and they love America, and so you sure that draft's pointing in the right direction?
Well, what I would say is we have generally seen the volume dropping. So that's why you see the graph going down. And what we also see is a lot of old theories being recirculated throughout this pandemic. So what we will be doing is, as we are part of the third-party fact-checking program with Facebook, is we will still be rating content as false and misleading in the Facebook system, which I can talk about more later. But we won't necessarily be writing lots of new fact checks because they will be recycling old misinformation. Also important to emphasize, we don't fact check conspiracy theories. And as this pandemic has gone on, misinfo has turned more and more into a conspiracy theory that we just can't fact check because it's just not possible.
How do you what's the difference between fake news and a conspiracy theory?
Oh, well, I would say that, straight misinfo has a clear claim and there are obvious facts which debunk it. But, if you say something like there is a global network of people run by Bill Gates who are secretly in charge of the world, there's no possible evidence that I can give you that will ever 100% disprove that, because it's a belief. And this is the trouble with things like QAnon, is that these people have a deep-rooted belief in something completely insane, in my opinion, but I can't provide, concrete evidence to show that it's not true. It's like a belief in God, to be honest.
Okay, thanks. So can you tell us what the picture is in Hong Kong, and can you explain the fact check lab and what you've seen here?
But I have a presentation about the content farms.
Great, perfect.
Yeah, okay, so okay, so here, can you see the presentation now?
Not yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, coming up. Yep.
Is it okay now?
Got it. Perfect.
Okay,
content farms.
Yes. As I guess you all know that since the June of 2019, the last year, there's a huge protest in Hong Kong, lots of protests in Hong Kong, and it also enhanced something called content farms in Hong Kong. So I would like to talk about it, but first, because I did the investigation of my previous job, so I want to show the logo here. And content farms are something like, actually they contain lots of clickbait articles, and their main concern is traffic and advertisement for their income. And they have, you can see they have Facebook pages with the cover photo, usually for they want the people to click into the articles. And you can see they have different pages, and usually with big words for the title, and you can understand what happens, and you want to click to know, to read the article. And one recent example is like this, is about a police officer, and when you click inside, you can see the right hand side, the article is something like that, and there are advertisements and ask you to read more. And also they have a disclaimer. They said that the article are only copied from the internet. If there's any problem, please tell us, something like that. But it's kind of hypocrite, because all they want is traffic, so they don't really think it's a big problem, I guess. I want to say is, since last year, because actually the problem of content farm happens I guess it's on the internet for a few years, since since there are many people using social media, because it's actually tracking people to their sites for their traffic, and I think it's kind of built-in feature for social media. But however, something interesting last year is that previously most content farm are from maybe some Chinese content farm are from, for example, mainland China or Taiwan. There are not much content farm that target Hong Kong people. I think because the market is much smaller in Hong Kong. However, last year, because of the protests and many Hong Kong people are concerned, so I think there's actually my investigation pointing to a company, though there's not 100% evidence, that a company is running this kind of content farms. And the contents are copied from Facebook, online forums, Telegram channels, and news media. They, as I said, they make a cover photo, big words on it to make you to click into it. And I think they don't have an intention to spread misinformation or any rumors. However, because they try to copy the most viral posts online, any content online, they're viral. And the most viral content online are usually some kinds of rumors or unverifiable claims of something extraordinary claims, but no evidence. So they copy lots of rumors about the protests and recently about the COVID-19. For example, there are rumors or some claims that the protesters were caused by the police and killed by them, and the police fake a suicide of these people. And anytime there are news about suicide, many people will guess, okay, these are those victims are the protesters, and this kind of I won't show the articles here because of the pictures, but this kind of articles are seen many this kind of articles are on Facebook and also on the content farms. And this poses a challenge for fact checking. Actually, I think it's a kind of great challenge for fact checking, because as sometimes you can sometimes you cannot fact check the conspiracy theory, and sometimes you cannot, and you just cannot fact check the unverifiable claims. However, when people are get used to this kind of articles, it's difficult for them to differentiate some legitimate source and content farms, because they seen this type of sites a lot, and they may guess, okay, it's when if I see it on the internet, it's true. And also is this kind of content farm make it easier to spread this misinformation or just some unverifiable claims. However, I want to stress that because the Hong Kong government and the Hong Kong police are always saying that the protesters are using the fake news for their political motivation, and even the chief executive Carrie Lam have said that the government will look to how to tackle this kind of fake news or misinformation online. But I want to stress that the problem of this kind of rumors or unverifiable claims are the symptoms, or not the cause. Because the real cause is that people just cannot, I mean, they don't trust, but I want to say they cannot trust the Hong Kong government and the Hong Kong police, and also the Chinese government for what they did in the past year. And the way that they, for example, if they want to make a new law to tackle the false information online, usually against the police, because they won't tackle any laws against the protest, tackle anything bad against the protester. And if they did this, it will make things much worse, because the lack of trust and the fear and the anger, all the emotion will just enhance the rumors and any unverifiable claims. And sometimes it looks like a conspiracy theory, I will admit, but however, if you are a Hong Kong people, you can understand this kind of anger or mistrust or distrust is I would say somehow justified, even though the claim are not justified. The emotion, I would say, is justified, and it's one of the worst thing for fact checker. Yes, and I mean, that's all I want to say.
Wasn't there a good example, I mean, in the past few days, when the criticism of the police version of what happened in Yung Long last year? Can you explain what happened there, and if you're talking about trust in the police and the government, I mean, this was a case. Maybe you can explain the incident where there was video evidence, but it was kind of don't believe the evidence of your own eyes was basically the message. Could you explain a bit what happened?
In the 21st of July last year, there was a huge attack in Yunnan by people wearing white shirts, and they gathered in the afternoon and the evening. Actually, they attacked some people nearby the NPR station. Around, I guess, as I remember, it's around 9 o'clock or 7 o'clock. I forgot this. And then they entered the station, and because of that, because there was an attack and there was a legislative councillor went there, and he called the police and he asked the people to stay there to be safe, and he wanted to watch what happened. And then there's another wave of attack. The people wearing the white shirts are attacking the passengers there. Some of them are the protester. After the protest, they went back home because they live there, so they were there. However, some of them are just residents in Yunnan. And there's a huge attack, and even the legislative councillor was beaten. But after a year later, the police arrested the legislative councillor, saying that he charged him for rioting because he said that what he said was actually making things worse and making the people fighting. And actually, in the past few months, you can see some online videos saying that what the mainstream media what the reporting of the mainstream media are lies. What happens in that night, is not attack from the from people wearing white shirts. They are fights against fights. They want to frame it against fights, and this is exactly what the police are talking. And one interesting thing is that the police are criticized by their not showing up, and they use 39 minutes to go to the Yunnan stations. And on the day that the police arrest the legislative councillor Lam Chatting, the police officer in the press conference saying that it's not 39 minutes, it's 18 minutes. It's exactly the same time, which is I watched an online video from the pro-government side who claim this again fights also use the same time frame. They calculate in different method, but they also want to reframe it as the police are not coming late. They just because of the fights or something like that. And I think it's kind of interesting. My guess is because many police officers are watching this type of videos, as I observed in the last year protests, because they always spreading some similar rumors on the pro-government side.
So I mean, that's just a great example of the kind of environment where you're going to have disinformation, misinformation, and conspiracy theories from all sides, right?
Yeah, yes, it's a huge disinformation campaign. I guess it's targeting the pro-government side and also the policemen, because one more example is that the police always believe there are some fake reporters on the scene,
right,
and they spread the rumors and the pro-government side are spreading the rumors of a fake journalist, fake press card. And you can see there are some video caught that the police are also saying talking the same rumors on the streets. And so I think they just believe this type of rumors, okay, and enhance their anger against the reporters. And you can see what they did.
Okay, so I've already got a couple of questions, but we'll come back to the questions once we've spoken to Kirsten and Aya. So Kirsten, Singapore, how does they introduced the fake news law, which was ostensibly a transparent exercise, and then they brought it in. I mean, how does the Singapore fake news law deal with a pandemic? What's been happening? And plus, you had an election as well. So, what's your experience have been? Can't hear you. Are you muted?
My mic's just been going in and out. Yeah, so the law which we call POFMA has been enforced since
POFMA is the
October
fake
last.
news law.
Yes, the fake news law. It came into force in October last year, and they started using it quite rapidly and quite often. So at this point in time, I think we've already crossed 60 different POFMA orders. Some have been used to deal with the pandemic, so dealing with misinformation about COVID, which is usually fair enough. Not a lot of people argue with that, but they've also used it against opposition politicians, against and against other critics of the government or the ruling party. During the election, what happened was that the ministers who have the power to exercise the law. So the way POFMA works is that government ministers can issue orders. So they'll issue an order to say, put this correction on top of your post, or they can tell you to take down the post, or they can tell an intermediary like Facebook to block access or take something down, or put on the correction notice for you if you refuse to comply. So government ministers have a lot of power in doing this. They don't have to go through the courts. They just issue the order and you have to comply. You can appeal to the courts after, but first you have to just comply with what the government minister tells you to do. So during the election, they gave the powers to permanent secretaries. So the civil servants started to exercise POFMA, and they did issue it against statements made by a few opposition politicians during the election time. Although people didn't seem to pay that much attention to it, and I think it's what like what Karya has said. If it's about public trust, and if the issue of public trust is not dealt with, then a law like POFMA could actually lead to people thinking, oh, it's just you using the law to clamp down on something. You know, the ruling party or the government is using the law to clamp down. And I think POFMA is one example of that, of how this whole discourse on fighting misinformation has kind of been appropriated basically by a government to give itself more power, because a lot of the things that POFMA is supposedly wanting to deal with, it's not actually clear how it can deal with it. So for example, before they brought in this fake news law, they said, oh, it's a big problem because we need to deal with foreign interference. What if foreign actors want to interfere in Singapore's domestic politics, and they use disinformation campaigns to destabilize us. So the main questions that civil society and critics of POFMA have asked is, firstly, what is the scale of this sort of campaigning in Singapore? The government has said that during this recent election this year, there was no evidence of anything like that happening after all.
Oh, we just lost Kirsten.
Oh.
Hello? She's coming back.
I'm back. Even if these things happen, even if there is domestic foreign interference, how does POFMA work? So I don't think POFMA actually would deal with that problem, because if it really was some sort of hostile foreign actor, they just wouldn't care about being issued orders. They would just ignore you, and there wouldn't actually be a lot that you can do. And we've seen an example, a mild example of this in one Singaporean who runs content farms, has been subjected to multiple POFMA orders. And because he's now living in Australia and is a naturalized Australian citizen, he just ignores them, and there's nothing they can do to him because they can't extradite him or anything. And so all they do is they issue orders to Facebook, telling Facebook to block or take down these pages. And then what he does is he starts a new page. So running a content farm, right? He just keeps starting new ones and then he puts up new content. And they've done this to him about 3 or 4 times and he just keeps going. So I think it kind of demonstrates the limitations of a law like this. So when we talk about, they always say there's always a trade-off. So I think the argument that I will make is that it has not been a worthwhile trade-off because we are not any safer from the threats that the government says they're fighting. But what has happened is that a lot of power has been given to the government to control speech, or at least hang that over people's heads. So like after POFMA has been passed, I know now that like a lot of NGOs and activists and some journalists are very concerned about this. So, it's now always at the back of your head, like, will I get POFMA if I say this? Can we make these claims? Will we get into trouble? And POFMA is just one more thing for activists to worry about. So I think that the trade-off in Singapore's case was, not really worthwhile. And it's just one example of how, what's ostensibly a very noble goal can be extremely problematic.
There's a question from Chi Xiang-ung, I hope I pronounced your name right. To what extent do you think POFMA affected the election this year, the election results?
I don't really feel it did. So that was the other thing, like I think people just didn't, by the time the election came around, people just didn't really take POFMA that seriously, 2 politicians who were subjected to POFMA orders. One was about a disputed population target number, and another was disagreement about how the government had handled COVID-19. And I think, the government POFMA'd these 2 statements, but it didn't seem to go anywhere because those 2 politicians who were the subject of these POFMA orders turned in the best performances that they ever had. Like, they lost, but with the highest vote share that they had compared to previous years. So it didn't seem to turn people off. And I think the problem then again, it comes back to the trust thing. Because for example, the one about POFMA and the population target numbers, the number itself as a specific detail might have been, disputed. But it was speaking to a truth and anxiety that Singaporeans had about population growth, about immigration, and about feeling squeezed in their own country, that the POFMA order kind of felt like a form of denying people's truth. And so people got angry about that because they felt like, okay, whether the number is real or not, the main point is the population growth and the immigration, and that's what Singaporeans were worried about. And so using POFMA was not enough to kind of overcome this broader unhappiness. Okay, thanks. So Facebook's in the sort of front line of all this. So I think you get some slides, I think, to explain how you're trying to fight this tsunami of disinformation. Yeah.
I do. Thanks, Eric. I'm just going to share them now. So I'll spend a bit of time just talking about our third-party fact-checking program. And, this is what Rachel kind of mentioned briefly, and about how this kind of factors into how we look at fighting misinformation on our platform. Quick intro, I work with our colleagues. I'm not sure if you caught a session with Chiman and Anjali on the news partnerships team at Facebook. I focus on programs, so that include training programs, as well as this third-party fact-checking program. And I work with all of our partners closely across the Asia-Pacific region, including Rachel. So I wanted to zoom out a bit and just kind of, before going to the program, talk about a wider approach to integrity and misinformation on the platform. We look at it in kind of 3 buckets. Remove, so that's anything that violates our community standards, which is a kind of global set of standards that we have that kind of governs what stays on or what is removed on the platform. Anything that violates those standards, we remove. And then under the reduce bucket, anything that doesn't violate the community standards but still undermines authenticity, so that's misinformation, we reduce, and that's where our third-party fact-checking program comes in. We also do a lot of work to inform our users so they can understand why certain content has been reduced, with misinformation overlays. And we also have a number of kind of news literacy, media literacy programs that we run across the platform. So that really falls into our informed buckets. We also, as well as community standards, we've kind of expanded our remove policies to include voter and census suppression. So any content that kind of shows wrong dates of polling or wrong locations of polling stations designed to kind of deter people from voting, we remove that from the platform. We also remove any content that could lead to imminent violence or physical harm. So that's kind of content inciting people to attack a certain kind of minority, or you know, to kind of create violence or lead to possible riots or demonstration that could lead to harm. We've actually recently expanded this in light of COVID to include any content that contains fake cures, or any content that contains fake numbers of, you know, the number of deaths or the number of people affected. We also remove from the platform. And the reason why we've done this is because we found that, you know, these fake cures, as Rachel kind of spoke about earlier, while they might seem harmless, they could also, you know, have this kind of harmful effect where people take less kind of precautions in, you know, protecting themselves COVID and take these cures or lean towards these cures. There's also some more kind of sinister cures out there, like drinking bleach or urine, that could definitely lead to offline harm. So we've got that in our policies as well. And we've also recently added misleading and manipulative videos, because we've seen this rise of manipulative videos on the platform. And then under our second bucket, the reduce, you know, people often ask us, why don't we just reduce misinformation? Why don't we just have that in the remove bucket? I mean, so remove misinformation. And the reason we do this is because we want to strike this balance of having, you know, people being able to come onto the platform to have this kind of authentic environment, but then also have the ability to kind of allow for them to understand why content they're seeing is rated as false or as misinformation, and then from there make their own decision as to whether they want to continue to engage with it. So it's that kind of having the balance of being informed, but also reducing this info, but still allowing them to be able to see it if they do want to engage in it. And so this is where our fact-checking program comes into. What is our fact-checking program? It is it's really kind of an industry first, and it's a constantly evolving tool and program where we work with human experts, so our fact-checking partners, and we combine it with machine learning and AI to really address this hugely like complex and nuanced problem of misinformation on the platform. And we set up, this has been going since just under 2 years. I joined about 1.5 years ago, and then we were only in about 3 countries. We're now in 14 countries. So these are some of our fact-checking partners just across 14 countries across Asia Pacific. Actually, we have about 70 partners across the world. And, you know, we've really kind of ramped up, and we're constantly looking where else we can expand. This week, we launched with a new country in Korea with JTBC. And this, we're going to constantly expand our fact-checking partners. And in order to become a fact-checking partner, they have to be IFCN certified. So that's a Pointer Institute. It stands for International Fact-Checking Network, and it shows this kind of level of transparency and expertise with our fact-checking partners when they join this program. And then the focus of our program is really, we want our fact-checkers to really kind of focus on identifying viral misinformation, and it's really the kind of worst of the worst out there. Rachel spoke about how we're unable to kind of, they don't concentrate on conspiracy theories because they don't have provably false claims. So it's really the kind of content that you can fact check using kind of other sources to verify the content. This program is an independent program, so our fact checkers have complete independence in choosing what they can what they want to fact check and what they want to focus on. We just kind of have these guidelines, these broad guidelines in place as they kind of go about do their work. And this is a quick overview of the process. So Facebook first identifies potential misinformation, and they do this using kind of a variety of AI, data, machine learning tools, as well as signals from the users to kind of identify misinformation and then queue it into the tool that our fact checkers use. Our fact checkers also have their own methods, and they can proactively identify content on their own and queue that into the tool. And we also have other tools available to them like CrowdTangle. Then they choose the content they want to prioritize, and they review and rate the accuracy of this content. And they do this using quite exhaustive fact-checking methods. I'm not sure if you were in the kind of fact-checking workshop yesterday, but various methods like reverse image search, which Rachel talked about. Once they kind of determine where the falsity is, and they've written their debunking article, they apply a rating to it. And then based on that rating, so false, partly false, false headline, Facebook then takes action, and we lower in the news feed. So people have kind of around 80% less chance that they will see it. There's also an overlay. I'm not sure if any of you have come across it. It covers the picture. It says this content has been fact-checked by a fact-checker, and then you can click onto the reference article. So it also informs people, if they do come across it, why this content has been deemed as, or has been rated as false. But this is what we also use AI. So we understand, the fact-checking process can be quite long, and it's also, it needs to be long because we want to make sure that the content that they're rating is, they're able to debunk it and get to the sources and the truth of it. So we use the reference articles and the content that they fact check to find similar information across the platform. So for one example, during COVID, during the month of March, we used 4,000 fact checks by our human fact checkers, and we're able to match it to around 40 million pieces of content using our AI and machine learning. So this is really how we scale out the program. And this is a constantly evolving kind of part of the program. Our data sets, to develop this AI, we really need huge data sets. And it's like with working with our fact checkers, we're constantly kind of feeding into these data sets, and we're getting better at detecting misinformation across multiple languages. So that's everything from me. I just wanted to kind of have this quick plug. If you want to learn more about our fact-checking program, you can just visit this site, facebook.com, Journalism Project Programs, third-party fact-checking. You can also just go to the Facebook Journalism Project website, and you'll be able to see it under the program section. So that's everything from me.
Okay, thanks. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So I've got a few questions. I'm just trying to think we might be able to put them together. There was a good, so if you can keep your answers fairly short. One of the very first questions actually was from Jacqueline Liu. It's a good point. What about half-truths? And for example, Rachel, how do you, it's not always full or empty, is it? I mean, when somebody's mixing in false information with facts, how do you deal with that? Is the whole thing contaminated? Is it a rotten apple because a bit's rotten, or how do you deal with that?
So we decide whether something seems to be misleading, and then we would apply a misleading, partly false rating as opposed to a straight false rating on a piece of content or a conspiracy, a piece of misinformation. And that's how we decide based on, maybe half of the post is false, or the photo is used in an incorrect context. So the photo is a real photo from a real event, but the context it's shared in is not true. So that's how we decide, and we have to weigh up whether it's spread significantly and whether the misleading element of the post is debunkable with proper sources, and if not, then we wouldn't fact check it.
Okay, I'd like to maybe put two questions together actually. One is from Christine Servando, who's a member of the FCC board, and she says, how do you measure the impact of fact-checking, right? And also, to what extent is confirmation bias, echo chambers hampering this work? And I'd like to maybe also add to that one, another question from Bennett Marcus, who says, maybe the echo chamber you've also got, as he says, how do you account for complete lack of logic in people who just believe viral misinformation. You know, he makes a good point. An American friend said the virus will disappear after the election, implying that Democrats are using the pandemic. I replied, so will the virus also disappear in the Philippines and Brazil and India after the US election? Very good answer, actually, Marcus. So it defies logic. So how do you measure the impact of what you're doing, and how do you deal with this? And I spoke to Claire Wardle, who heads up First Draft, a couple of weeks ago, and it's the first time I've ever really seen her put her head in her hands and say, you know, we're just drowning in this, and it's very difficult to deal with it. Both the volume and also the fact that people will not change their minds, you know. And of course, there's the reverse psychology that the more you insist, and the more they think you're telling them they're stupid, the more they'll dig their heels in. So I don't know who would like to, maybe Aya, do you want to pick that one up? How do you measure the effectiveness of fact-checking? How do you deal with echo chambers, and how do you just give up on people who just won't change their minds? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question, and I'll try and do my best to answer very kind of 1 minute or less. But I mean, in terms of like, how do we measure impact? You know, I can speak on behalf of the fact-checking program. It's something we're constantly kind of looking at. So the one is, I spoke about the misinformation overlays that we have on our content is fact-checked. And, you know, first of all, we reduce it on the platform, but when people do come across this misinfo overlay, they still have a choice to click through and see this content, engage with it. But we have found that 95% of people don't actually click through. So that's, you know, that's a huge kind of, you know, stopping of preventing people from, you know, engaging with it once they're informed that it is false. In terms of, you know, we also do a lot like on the product side to really kind of, you know, look at the different forms. So there's misinformation. We spoke about like echo chambers, and we have several teams kind of like studying the psychology of users to really understand how we can address this. I know this is a huge, complicated problem, and I know, you know, to your point about Claire Wardle's comment, it's, you know, something that it seems kind of this huge wave, and I think slowly and surely we are really kind of working at it and improving it. And it does take time to develop these AI or machine learning kind of you know, implementations, especially across different languages. But I have seen, you know, evidence that we are, you know, getting there, and it is improving as we expand with our partners, our fact-checking partners, as well as with our product globally.
And what about in Hong Kong? I mean, for example, Prince Edward. I mean, the hoax, the conspiracy theory, or the facts, according to some people, I think, is that the police killed 6 people in the Prince Edward, and the problem is there was no, and a lot of this exists because there's an information vacuum. The reporters were chased out. There was no CCTV released. So what's your answer? How do you deal with people who won't change their minds?
I think it's kind of difficult, but for example, there is actually, though, because the reporter were not inside, were not allowed to inside the Prince Edward Station during when the police are arresting people. So it's one of the cause that there are lots of rumors. It's kind of a conspiracy theory, but I won't say it's false because I have no evidence to disprove it. However, you can still do something. For example, FactWire and news organization in Hong Kong, they try to investigate the claim that the 6 people died, and because online there are some photos taken from the videos that claiming, okay, these 6 people, protesters or passengers, were killed by the police, and FactWire, the reporters, they try to go to the police station to wait for the people who arrest in 2 months, because they have to go to, because those 2 are arrested, they have to report to the police station for every month. So they just wait there, and they find, as I remember, it's 43 or 49 people, and they even find those 6 people who were claimed that they die, and they have a huge investigation. They have a very detailed interview, and though they cannot say 100% sure that there no one died that night, at least they can say we have investigated and these 6 people were not dead, were not killed. I think still
But people still believe people were killed.
Yes, yes, and they were criticized by some people that they are helping the police, but
Right.
I think it's difficult to change every people at once, but you can change part by part. And I have one more story to share about this kind of thing. I have read an article from the Taiwan Fact Checking Center who they are part of the third party fact checking program of Facebook, and they have a comment section in the article. And I have and that time I read an article, and there are lots of comments criticizing them and criticizing the fact checking center. And I was wondering why there are lots of people leaving the comments. And after a while, I understand the reason is that because they have shared misinformation, a piece of misinformation on Facebook, and that piece of information is fact checked by the Taiwan Fact Checking Center, and it's flagged as a misinformation, and then Facebook noticed there's a notification on their Facebook, and because Facebook told them, okay, this is misinformation, and then they click to the article, and they read that, but their reaction is not that okay, oh, this is wrong. It's that they didn't know is I think they didn't know the whole fact checking program, so they believe is that the Taiwan Fact Checking Center somehow had the power to notifies them on Facebook saying that okay, what you share is wrong, and they are very angry, so they criticize the fact checking center.
Okay.
I think it's kind of an interesting story, but it's a problem that we have to deal with. We have to explain the whole process.
I've got a red light flashing here. We're almost out of time, unfortunately. So can I just go quickly around 30 seconds? Are you optimistic that we can beat this information or no? Can you?
No.
Rachel, are you going to win the fight?
I think we can over time, yeah, with better education for everybody.
I mean, no, in the short term, you have to, a very long term, I'm not sure, but not really.
Aya, what do you think? Do you think with your partnerships and your artificial intelligence will get there?
I think Rachel's graph was very hopeful. I know it might not seem like that, but the kind of volume that she saw going down shows a kind of glimmer of hope. And I think also the point of it's a mixture of education as well as product and fact checking.
Yeah, I think the issue of trust and education is really important, and I think I don't think we'll ever eradicate misinformation or disinformation, but hopefully people gain more skills. And I've seen that with young Singaporeans, they ask a lot more questions about the things that they are reading and seeing, and I hope that will continue.
Okay, fantastic. I'd just like to say there was some good questions we didn't quite get to. If any of the viewers would like to follow up, please send me a Facebook message or a DM on Twitter, and I'll follow up with our speakers. And I would just like to thank you all again. We could have spoken all day long. It's a big topic, but you're doing great work, and thank you. And talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, so thank you very much, the panelists. I am Mike Rautashai, and your director for the NVCon. So just a quick housekeeping announcement for everyone. So as you can see on the ticker, below. So during the lunch break, we have a 1.5 hour lunch break between 12 to 1:30. So we divided our networking breaks into 2 sessions. So starting from 12 to 12:45, there would be meet AAJA-Asia President Juan Ha. So if any of you would like to get to know more about AAJA, ask any questions about the organization, feel free to go there. And from 12:45 to 1:30 p.m. we have a student hangout that will be hosted by our our AAJA-Asia student representatives. So be sure to check that out as well. How to access the networking rooms is that you go to our Facebook group. So I would say most of you probably watching this live stream from Facebook as well. So go to rooms and check the networking breaks. So the networking breaks will be hosted on the Facebook Messenger room, which is really just one click, when you are on our homepage. So hopefully we'll see you guys there. And also for the panelists as well, feel free to carry on the conversation, and maybe during the breaks we can also discuss a little bit more as well.
Sure.
Also, for the coming up next, we also have the next panel coming, which is the hot ideas for climate change, which is going to start at 1:30 p.m. right here as well. So very interesting topics about those of you who are interested in reporting on environmental science, especially the climate change, which is one of the most important topics this year. So I'll hope to see you guys on these sessions as well, and have a great lunch.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.